Okay. Hello, Andrew. Trying to get the attention of our moderator. Hi, Andrew. Oh, okay.
Excuse me, I'm here. I was just okay, please.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and I guess good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And may I, on behalf of the entire members of Habitat International Coalition, welcome you all to this side event, which is being hosted by HIC Women and Habitat Africa Working Group and NGO Working Group to End Homelessness. As a way of introduction, the Women and Habitat Africa Working Group and the Latin America and Caribbean Women and Habitat Network are members of Habitat International Coalition. This is a coalition of more than 380 organizations in various countries. And I want to say that they are represented in all regions of the world. So the working groups work collectively and individually with HIC members and allies to tackle historical challenges facing women and girls in their habitat. Some of the issues that they work on include women's rights to adequate housing, land, and inheritance rights, and also including full and equal access to use and control of natural and economic resources, in addition to equal representation and participation of women in decision-making spaces. Similarly, the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness is a group of NGOs and individuals advocating at the United Nations and pursuing the human rights to adequate housing for all and to end homelessness, so that everyone can realize their full human rights and potentials. The vision of the working group to end homelessness is a future in which everyone, every person, wherever you are, will experience the dignity of having a safe, habitable, affordable, secure home, safeguarding human rights and supportive, sensitive policies and programs that would end homelessness. So these two groups, they share a lot of similarities and passion. And so they have decided to co-host today's event titled Unequal Access to Employment and Decent Work, the Case of Women in Africa and Latin America. This side event aims to further raise awareness on the critical issues affecting women and girls in Africa and Latin America. We're all aware of the numerous, regional, international policies, instruments, protocols, conventions, which feature the commitment of various member states and governments to actions such as giving women full and equal access to economic resources, including the rights to inheritance and to ownership of land and property. And in addition to this, let me also remind us that in the agreed conclusions of the 66th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, there were several references to the importance of women's land tenure security and ownership of land. And and the importance of inheritance for women. It also said that fulfilling SDG 5, and in fact, all the SDGs, is impossible without dealing with the issues of women's land ownership and inheritance. So if no one is to be left behind, and if we must reach the furthest first in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, then it is time to address the breach and the gap on the rights of women and girls in Africa and Latin America, as well as to ensure that everyone has a safe, habitable, affordable, secure place to call home. For me, the key issue is the impact or effect of full productive employment and decent work for all on the issue of traditional barriers and resistance to women's rights and ownership of land and habitat, as well as guaranteeing their inheritance rights to land from either their father or their mother. So to effectively discuss and throw more light on this and many more issues that we are going to be looking at today, we have speakers who are practitioners, advocates, and defenders of the rights of women, girls, and the homeless persons. So today's event will be moderated by someone who really understands all the issues that I have enumerated earlier. And he stands with women and girls in Africa and Latin America. So to moderate this session is Mr. Andrew Alimadi. Mr. Andrew is a social affairs officer at the United Nations headquarters in New York. In his role, he supports member states in their negotiations for resolutions on cooperatives in social development and drafts United Nations reports on cooperatives. So during Andrew's 21-year career with the UN, he has also worked in the Office of the High Representative for Least Developed Countries and the UN Economic Commission for Africa based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Prior to joining the UN, Andrew taught economics at City University in London, UK. He holds a bachelor's degree in development studies from the University of East Anglia, as well as a master's degree in economics with reference to Africa from the University of London. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Alimadi to this session. Andrew, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ife, with whom we have worked for many years and who is so committed to social development and women's issues. We are so happy to see you again at the Commission for Social Development. And thank you, everybody. Good morning. And thank you for inviting me to moderate this session. And I should say good day, not good morning, because I'm looking at the chat and I see that we have some people joining from Cameroon, some from Egypt. So it's really an international occasion. Thank you all very much. So I'm at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations headquarters, and we are the ones organizing the Commission for Social Development every year. And the Commission grew out of some 25 years ago. There was the World Social Summit in Copenhagen. And at that point, I think that, the Social Summit was born because a lot of people were concerned with the overemphasis on profit maximization and short-term growth. and which was being looked at at the exclusion of social policies and discrimination and poverty that was being suffered by many. And this World Summit brought the issue of social policy back on top of the international agenda. It led to issues like this was also a period of structural adjustment. If we, some of us will remember, some of the older ones will remember structural adjustment, which was very focused on growth and not on its impacts on society. So it brought issues like social adjustment with the human face. It brought issues like, I mean, even the Millennium Development Goals could be seen to as an attempt to address social issues that were not being central to the international discourse. So currently, the world is again facing, so many different crises. I don't need to enumerate, cost of living, climate, and many other issues. So it's once again a time to reconsider social policy as a very important component of international growth and development. So the United Nations Secretary General has proposed to member states that we organize another World Social Summit in 2025. We need another World Social Summit because we are slipping away from the Millennium Development Goals. Poverty has increased for the first time in a generation during the period of COVID. And we need to once again focus on the benefit. The whole idea of growth is to benefit humanity. So we need to come back to focus on human beings and focus once again on social policies. And so member states at the United Nations are still considering this proposal and hopefully will agree to hold another World Social Summit in 2025, where we can once again deal with issues, and especially issues of discrimination and empowerment of women, as Dr. Ife has mentioned quite eloquently. There is no sustainable development without inclusion of women and without inclusion of all the marginalized people of the world. A few years, 2020 it was, when we had the Commission for Social Development with a focus on homelessness. And at that commission, the member states agreed on a resolution. And I just want to read one paragraph of that resolution, paragraph 44, which invites all relevant stakeholders, including the United Nations system and civil society organizations, to continue to promote the exchange of information and good practices and programs, policies and measures that successfully reduce inequality in all its dimensions, address challenges to social inclusion, and address homelessness through affordable housing, political and social protection policies, with the aim of achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So it's good that we're having a discussion today on issues of empowerment, on addressing exclusion, and on addressing homelessness, which continues to plague many countries of the world, rich and poor. So without further ado, all UN meetings seems to run over time. I don't know if we're going to do any better today, but let me welcome our speakers. And we're going to start with Dr. Priscilla Izar from the School of Architecture and Planning of the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. And if I mispronounce your name or anything, please correct me. I give the floor to Priscilla. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Should I go ahead with the presentation?
You can start by correcting me and then make the presentation.
No, it's Priscilla Izar. But you said it very well. Thank you so much. So I'll go quickly. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Good day to everybody. And thank you to HIC and Dr. Ife for setting up this panel and inviting us. I wanted to start quickly by framing, by talking how I'm framing this presentation. Can you go back to the first one, please? And how I organized it. I'm talking about women in formal and informal sectors through the perspective of the habitat and the built environment, and focusing specifically on peripheral territories and communities. Second slide, please. And considering these realities of peripheral territories, I wanted to talk about the importance of looking at them in intersectional and transversal ways. And then I'm gonna show some practical examples from projects in Tanzania, including some of the federation, and karibu to the members of the federation from Tanzania that are here in the presentation today. Third slide, please. So about intersectionality, not to throw out big terms, but just to make sure that we are focusing about, when we're talking about women and informal women and employment, we take into consideration how the uneven distribution of power amongst gender, sexuality, religion, and where people live disproportionately affect poor and non-white women. And next slide. And then addressing these issues transversely, meaning that when we look at initiatives by women or that seek to support them, to consider crossing different sectors, for example, housing and infrastructure, health, education, employment, and so on. And I know I'm speaking to an audience that I don't need to teach the pray to the priest, but as we are discussing about it, we consider the transversality as well. Next slide. And then focusing on peripheries, meaning communities and territories that are predominantly poor and marginalized, marginalized by the state and public and private corporations in terms of development and financing of projects locally, and also predominantly self-built and self-managed urban environments built by the residents. Next slide. So that's not to say, and I wanted to emphasize that the state and the private institutions are absent from these territories. There is public and private investment in these areas, but they're absent from investments in housing, infrastructure, mobility, health, education, and this is a policy decision by the state and its partners. And this becomes evident in contexts where these conditions of this investment happen side by side with a lot of investment in policing and security and large-scale development projects that oppress particularly women. Next slide. So these peripheral territories are where predominantly poor and informal workers live and also work. For example, in Dar es Salaam, where I focus a lot of my work, recent studies show that less than 25% of the uses in informal territories are solely residential. And so, Diana. So just to give some numbers, since I'm talking about employment, according to the International Labor Office, 63% of all men and 58% of all women in the world are employed in the informal sector, majority of men, but in low income and lower middle income countries, this relation is inverted, so women are the majority. And in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, almost 90% of all women are employed in the informal sector and 75% in Latin America. So men and women working in the informal sector and living in peripheries are stigmatized and vulnerable in many ways in their everyday life, in their encounters with the state, in disaster situations, and even in how they commute. Next slide. And then women working in the informal sector are often found in the most vulnerable positions, for example, in domestic work where they're subjected to violence. They suffer more from the accumulation of paid and unpaid responsibilities. They earn less and live in larger houses, so their income spreads more thinly. and increasingly poor women who are the head of households are becoming in debt, and this has worsened during the COVID pandemic. At the same time, women are protagonists in community activism and insurgency. They are involved in multiple forms of struggle to improve their neighborhoods and communities and to protect their health. And this is where you start to see this paid and unpaid work in practice. Peripheral women operate through circuits of care and solidarity. And this is really important to consider in discussions about decent employment and equal pay. Next. So a crucial aspect when talking about informal employment and women is vulnerability. So this is and stigmatization. So I wanted to get back to this notion of intersectionality. For example, when talking about waste pickers who are among the most vulnerable informal workers, and women are worse off than men. So there's this general idea that women are worse off because they earn less and are more vulnerable to violence. There is an intersectional study by WHAWG, which stands for Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. Look at the reality of different groups of waste speakers divided by gender in 4 cities in 2 different regions of the Global South. 2 in Latin America and 2 in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the study explains why women are more vulnerable. They earn less because they spend more time in unpaid hours. They also are in charge of sorting, which pays less, and men are in charge of collecting. Because women are in charge of sorting, they're more confined and vulnerable to oppression, but men also suffer more from police violence, for example. And then an important study was that, finding from this kind of study, is that organization and connection to social networks help to stigmatize the work of waste speakers and help them cope. And labor organizing.
Yes. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. The interpreters have asked that you slow down a little. They cannot
okay,
keep up
sorry.
with the interpretation.
I am
Thank
trying to think. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
And
no,
thank you, and sorry for that. So the point being that the point being that organizing makes a big difference. Makes a big impact in how vulnerable a group such as waste speakers are. So the women waste speakers in the Latin American cities are better off than the ones in sub-Saharan African cities because of the overall level of labor organization that's in there. And that doesn't have specifically to do with gender, but it affects them. Now, next slide, please. So then I'll skip through, but don't skip yet, Diana, please, through these 2 slides, also for the sake of time. But again, to talk about an important group of informal workers who are the street vendors, and in particular, the food vendors, who are very important in African and Latin American cities, and who are predominantly women. The food vendors, they are very important in terms of food security because they offer affordable and healthy foods to the poor, but they are also super vulnerable because of their working conditions, lack of job security, and most recently also because of the effects of the COVID pandemic. Next slide, Diana, please. But then there is also a big difference between informal street food vendors that are on the streets and those that are a little bit more formalized, working in wet markets or open markets. And these nuances are also important to consider when we are discussing about this broader group of food vendors. Next one. So now I wanted to share a few projects in Tanzania involving peripheral women and informal employment. And my goal sharing these examples here is to describe how inequalities and vulnerabilities and insurgencies and creations, they all happen at the same time. And And that's how we need to understand our work and work with it. So these projects in different ways are centered on the multiple disadvantages of women in their territories and also in their interests and desires. The first example comes out of the work from TWHAWG, which is the Tanzanian Women Architects for Humanity. It's an organization set up by 3 architects and 1 engineer in 2010. They wanted to address gender inequality in their profession, working with young women architects, university students, but also working with marginalized communities and giving their expert advice in the auto-constructed territories. Next slide, please, Diana. And since then, TWHAWG has grew into a network of professionals involving planners, quantity surveyors, that use construction as a tool to build a supportive environment for marginalized women and their communities. They have a number of initiatives, including mentorship program for the young professionals, community projects that bring together university students, secondary students from the communities, women from the community. And I invite you to look at the website and learn more. We had prepared a video, but it didn't fit in this format, but you can see the videos there. And today, and then in addition to that, today TWHAWG continues to expand, and it's growing from a project-based organization into a network that builds knowledge through these experiences and through these lived experiences, which is also something that we deal with as the urbanization is continuing, peripheries are expanding, and situations change, and we need to be following this change. The second example, which is here on the screen, comes out of an action research project by the City Lab Dar es Salaam at Arden University, where I was before I came to WITS, and documented the trajectory of peripheral women who are members of the Federation for the Urban Poor, working with the assistance of another NGO, the Center for Community Initiatives, in improving the communities. I'm going to speak quickly because I'm seeing that I'm going over my time and I don't want to skip the next one. So here, the focus was on learning the experiences of the women involved in improving the conditions of their neighborhood, especially in terms of sanitation and building biofuel toilets. That's the Tanzanian Federation for the Urban Poor working in a neighborhood. And then the City Lab brought students to learn from these experiences as well, but also to change their perception about peripheries and destabilize these social norms and understandings learned at university and see the reality with other eyes. You can also go to the City Lab and watch the video that explains more. Next slide, please. The last example comes out of transversal work that an important leadership of the Federation in Tanzania is doing, Husna Hussein, who I think she's here in the meeting as well. And a few years, so Husna joined the Federation helped create a Federation chapter in her neighborhood, has since become a leader in a representative in the Tanzanian Federation, but through her work, she advocated to create a textile factory for marginalized women in her territory a few years ago. The factory was set up, but Husna and other women realized that that was not enough to support the women because they needed more than a sewing machine and even the textile factory. They needed further support. Many of these women were marginalized. The factory became a safe space for them, so they wouldn't leave. So that wasn't working out with this vision of a narrow vision of income generation. Recently, Husna added to her multiple responsibilities the management of a smaller factory with the women, operating in ways that better serve them. So here I wanted to emphasize how peripheral women struggle to change their reality, and in this case, turn their work into the textile factory as a means to gain more autonomy and not an end within itself. I think I will skip the summary, just review the next 2 slides, Diana, unless I still have a little bit of time. I just wanted to emphasize again that I spoke about this combination of struggle and insurgence inefficiency going on in the peripheries. And then part of our job, at least myself as an architect and planner, but mostly as an action research scholar, is to help document them, to challenge them. And the next slide, Diana, thank you very much. Last one. Yeah, thank you very much for listening. And thank you to HIC and to TAWA, to Victoria Hellman from TAWA, who gave me the information, CCI Federation, and to Husna for sharing their information for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And sorry to speak so fast.
Yeah, it was packed with information. I can see the temptation to speak as fast as possible to make sure you squeeze in all that rich research that you have been doing. And it's always good to see that despite the challenges that people are facing in communities that are marginalized, that people are actually taking action. They're taking, matters into their hands to solve their own problems. And it's leading to small steps in the right direction. And the challenge for all of us is to see how we can take these good lessons and good practices and scale it up to a broader audience. So thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next speaker is Miss Olga Luisa Leon de Quiroga. I'm sure I got that one wrong. Social movements of Sao Paulo in Brazil, where we know there's a lot of activities going on. So I'll give you the floor, please, and you have 12 minutes.
¿Cuántos minutos? Bueno, buenos días. Yo soy Olga.
Well, good morning. My name is Olga Luisa Leon de Quiroga. I am a woman that works for household movements to help those people that are struggling to get a household. Here, we bring women together and movements together as well. And through the meetings that we have had, we explain to those women that we are all equal, and as human beings, we can work together. And do whatever we want to do as long as we are treating other people as we would like to be treated. We work a lot on violation of rights concerning women particularly. We also work on public policy making in 2020 and 22 in Brazil due to the pandemic. We saw that there are many things that are worth noting. For instance, inequality is social. People are struggling to get food on their table. Another important aspect is violence towards women. That's why we hold meetings. In the context of cities and territories packed of inequality, we work towards empowering women. Our goal is to make women being seen just like any other man. For instance, the number of women that died during the pandemic grew in terms of women being killed in incidents of domestic violence. The COVID-19 pandemic highlights the importance of having good services available at peripheral areas and to address hunger, the lack of food. That's another factor that affects a lot of women in peripheral areas. So we are a group of women that work with other women with a lot of love and a lot of care, trying to bring equality among men and women. We need to work hard on that regard. For instance, we created a self-management program so we could build our own households where the government gives us the right to land as well as the materials to build those households. We build, and by we I mean men and women. We work together for 2 or 3 years until our household is complete. But what do we do when it all indicates that we are not able to do anything? Well, we incentivize women through tours, conferences, talks, and dances even. In Brazil, they are very common. They are called cirandas. And in these places, we let women know that they are equal, that their rights are equal, and it's up to us to empower ourselves to work for everything that we want to achieve. And thanks to God, we had the opportunity to work on women's rights. And as women, we're stronger when we're together. When we want to get something done and we organize ourselves, things run more smoothly. And we realize that we can get things done even better. We also create some educational materials. Information and educational materials are created because for us women, information is important because not every woman dying on a peripheral area has access to TV or journals or newspapers. So thanks to these informational and educational materials, we let women know what's going on so they can muster up the courage to step away from that difficult life and improve their lives. We want to empower women in many areas, such as work. Men and women collaborate. Why? Because we want to show other people that women can and men are not as strong as they think they are. Because sometimes we women are stronger. That's why we continue organizing conferences. And it is through the movement of household here in Sao Paulo, we have worked a lot. And our construction efforts have improved. Our households have improved. Back in the day, we had 35 square meter household, but now we have 47 to 60 square meter household, making women's lives easier. Another thing that we secured was working with elderly people. Because in many countries, when we talk about elderly, we talk about old people. When people talk about old, they think about throwing people to the garbage can. But we want other people to understand that the elderly also have rights, political rights, such as the right to vote. And since we are a majority, we can elect whomever we want who works for us. Today, we are very, very happy because we finally managed to elect as president of Brazil a man who works for us. He comes from the northeastern part of the country. He comes from a favela. And we know that every time the PT, the workers or the laborers party is elected president, we know our rights will be secured. We know that we're gonna get top quality education. In general, all of our rights will be respected as they should be. That president works a lot on social inequalities. As human beings, men and women should have a happy and secure job position, which includes compensation. Sometimes men earns tons of money while women only get some peanuts. But here, we women work to get things done and earn equally. We also articulate resources and get donations, such as food baskets that are intended for more needed families. And through these household movements, we managed to send all those food baskets to those in need. We also work with education for children and young people. We complement the education they get at schools. We also work to get a decent job. And by decent, I mean having a job position they can work on while their kids are at school. And once they leave their work, they can get back to their families so their children will not be on streets. I am so very happy. I am a happy woman. I'm 86. And as long as I'm alive, I want to be part of these household movements because household movements here in Brazil are the entry gate for all other rights. If you have a house to call home, you will get education and transportation. All rights come down to this. That's why I like working on household movements a lot. I'm super happy to be a female citizen who works towards helping other human beings to leave poverty, be empowered, be a facilitator. I don't really care where they come from. I only care about helping them. That would be all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here because I'm representing women and the habitat. I'm part of the Union of Household Movements. And in my opinion, household movements are the best civic school. That's where I learn what rights are and how to safeguard other people's rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Olga, for that inspirational remarks and for the inspirational work that you are doing. And it's good to note that you're wearing the iconic image of Angela Davis, who has been struggling for equality and women's rights for, well, 50 years now, maybe. And it's, yes, it's good to see that you're also doing similar work. And what I noted a couple of things that you mentioned was the issue of men thinking they're stronger and, you know, trying to project power and in all circumstances, which is basically an expression of toxic masculinity, which a lot of men have grown up with, and they are trying to shed it off, but need help. They need help from enlightened people such as yourselves and from the work that you do in order that we can all shed this toxic masculinity. And something else that I noted was the work you're doing on violence against women, which in this last year address, for those who listen to the Pope from time to time, Pope Francis said, the violence against women is almost satanic, and it's an insult to God. It is indeed an insult to all of us. And thank you for all the work that you're doing against them. Okay, so now we move to our next speaker, who is Diana Wachira. I'm from Uganda, so I think I got that name right. Diana Wachira is the Learning Officer, General Secretary, Habitat International Coalition. Diana, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I am just trying to bring up my presentation, just a minute, but maybe to just begin by thanking everyone for being here today, for making the time to attend this CSocD event by HIC, and that we will be able to really contribute towards towards the bigger conversation and towards the theme of the CSocD event. So yes, there is my presentation. I hope everyone can see it. Yes, so just to say again that my name is Diana Wachira. I am the HIC Learning Officer, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. My topic for today will be looking at full productive employment and women and habitat-related rights, exploring the intersections and implications. Just to say hi to Edmundo. He was also quite key in contributing to this document. A quick overview about the Habitat International Coalition is that it's a global, independent and non-profit member organization for the defense, promotion, full and progressive realization of human rights related to habitat, and that we are a global community of civil society organizations, social movements, voluntary agencies across the globe. And our strategic pillars focus on housing and land rights, social production of habitat, habitat and gender, and habitat and environment. So a quick introduction to the topic that I'll be speaking on. I tried to relate it to the SDG Goal 8 on decent work and economic growth that aims to promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. I wanted to highlight particularly target 8.5, which is that by 2030, there will be achievement of full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men. And just to say that then this would result to productive employment and decent work as being key elements to achieving a fair globalization and poverty reduction. But to do so, there are particular factors that need to be put in place. So one of these factors is that conditions must be created to allow both men and women to have quality jobs that stimulate the economy, and that there has to be integration of disadvantaged population and the recognition and protection of gender equality as an enabler and accelerator. Just to further continue on this is that the decent work agenda really looks at a pragmatic approach to achieving the SDG Goal 8, and it's based on 4 key pillars. And through these 4 key pillars, there are priority gender issues that are also opportunities. I wanted to particularly flag out equal access to productive resources as a priority gender issue, that falls within the employment and income generation pillar. And among the other pillars include the social protection pillar, the social dialogue and standards and rights at work. But all of these 4 pillars have priority gender issues. My focus really was in terms of fleshing out the equal access to productive resources. Further elaborating this point, and I think this is something also that Andrew alluded to, that there has been quite a lot of conversations, a lot of processes over the years, and there is steadily growing progress for gender equality and decent work that has seen, for example, a lot of women across the globe increase their participation in the labor force. However, the increase in labor force participation has not necessarily resulted to the reduction or the removal of gender inequality in work. And this is because inequality has persisted because of a lot of disparities in the workplace. So my point in this is that the differentiation of how men and women are able to access employment and employment opportunities is one of the issues that has led to the persistence of gender inequality. And some of these factors of differentiation include access to productive resources and access to land and access to habitat-related rights. Moving further, and just also picking up from what I've mentioned in terms of access to housing, access to land, and access to productive resources, really then differentiates how men and women are able to access employment and employment opportunities. So we have women globally continuing to face discrimination in access to these resources, and particularly in Africa and Latin America, where women not only face economic barriers, but there are also legislative barriers, there are social and cultural barriers as well. So this limits women's capacity to ensure agricultural productivity, security of livelihoods and food security. And of course, it's linked to issues of migration, issues of urbanization, issues of risk and violence and poverty, as the 2 panelists, Olga and Priscilla, have also alluded to. And we find a lot of the world's poorest workers, majority of them women, remaining in poverty through land inequality. Just to also continue and also emphasizing the point of these multiple layers or the multiple complexities or the multiple layers of exclusion that women face, is that access to productive resources then is not only about using them, it's more about looking at the issues that then generate these various layers of exclusion. The example I've given in this case is that, for example, I find this of a lot in Africa, that women access to land is often faced with layers of complexities where the legal framework may actually recognize these rights, but customs and traditions may not recognize or defend those rights, instead taking them away. So the multiple layers also creates a problem in the economic participation of women, and in this way, in the access to decent work and productive employment. Just a summary of some of the points I've highlighted in my previous slides is that we have lack or unequal access to land and habitat-related resources as one of the factors driving the feminization of poverty. That's the increasing gap between men and women caught in the cycle of poverty. And then the goal to ensure decent and productive work for all will not be attained as long as women continue to face unequal access to resources. So trying to see the intersection between the two, that the goal to ensure productive and decent work will not be attained as long as women continue to face unequal access to resources, to employment, to unequal pay, and limited access to social protection. Securing land and property rights, of course, is very central to this conversation. We are looking at how women can further engage in productive work, get higher earnings and individual savings, better access to credits, improving living conditions, in this way contributing to economic growth. But we are also looking at issues of housing upgrading and expansion, opportunities for small-scale enterprises and industry. We're looking at sustained livelihoods in this sense as well. So securing lands and property rights is very crucial too, and it's also very important. And of course, it influences how women participate in decent work. So the next slide also just then brings further this conversation by trying to, after we have sort of looked at the intersections between these two topics, trying to summarize it in a way that says that improving access to the use of and control over land and productive resources is essential for ensuring women's equality and rights enjoyment, especially their rights to decent work. And just to really flesh out this statement as something that we thought, or I thought would be good to contribute to the larger conversation, is that creating productive employment and decent work for both men and women is key to reducing inequality in a sustained manner. Then there are multiple economic significances and possibilities afforded by secure land and housing rights, particularly to women. So one of these economic significance, and possibility afforded by secure land rights in this case is the reduction of inequalities, particularly to employment and employment opportunities. So there's a need for interconnected interventions towards reduced gender inequalities in the decent work agenda, i.e. through enhanced access to productive resources. Of course, looking at it as an issue that really has or demands some attention as one of the key interconnected intervention to really reduce these gender inequalities. And looking at enhanced women's access to the use of and control over resources that will ensure gender equality by improving women's economic, social, and political power. So these key contributions really try to unpack the previous statement by making a case for how really should we position enhanced access to productive resources as an issue, and that it's important in the reduction of inequalities that then allow women to participate socially, to participate politically, and to also participate economically. And as I conclude, some of the other contributions and recommendations is that there needs to be improved and enforced secure land and productive resources rights for women. And just to also think about these multiple layers or multiple barriers of the access, use, and control. So there has to be really reinforced land and productive resources rights. There also needs to be stronger rights and equal access to land. And this would give the most vulnerable, especially women, the solid ground they would need to work their way out of poverty. And of course, further illustrating this point is that strengthening land rights, controlling the distribution of ownership, and ensuring women have fair access to land. And as I conclude, finally, is looking at gender equality in decent work needs to be at the core of the recovery efforts from the COVID-19 pandemic and the full implementation of the 2030 agenda as lessons learned, from experiences of the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in summary, that has been really my presentation, and trying to see exactly how do we identify these intersections, these implications, how do we make more of an issue and bring more attention to the aspect of the decent work agenda, bringing out the aspect of priority gender issues, and particularly equal access to productive resources. Thank you, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diana, for highlighting the importance of resources. I mean, this is especially in most developing countries, land is a very key resource, and it determines a lot of your life chances, whether you have access or not. And you also mentioned quite rightly that sometimes the legal instruments are there, but the social constraints remain. So there has to be still this constant conversation to see how we can transform society to accept that gender discrimination is not necessary. It's gender discrimination does not help men or women. It doesn't help anybody. So this is an ongoing discussion, and it's an ongoing struggle. And I mean, at the United Nations, there's many resolutions enforcing gender equality, but how are they implemented continues to be a constant struggle. So thank you very much for that. And now let me move on to our next presenter. We're going to hear from Lydia Garden. Chair of the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness and Executive Director, Ruff Institute of Global Homelessness, DePaul University, Chicago. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful and humbling to be with such a wonderful group of presenters and speakers today. I want to start off my remarks acknowledging that I do not have experience in either the Latin American or African context, and just reflecting on the importance of those of us in other contexts standing in solidarity and helping to lift up the voices and the interventions of people who are experts in those. And so with that recognition and humility, I offer a few remarks today on the importance of gender equality in decent work. Next slide, please. As has already been touched on today, but I think, again, a very important point to make is the interconnectedness of all of the Sustainable Development Goals. These goals reinforce each other, and these goals were deliberate as they were set. And so as we see, goal 1, no poverty, goal 5 of gender equality, goal 8, decent work and economic growth, we know that we will not achieve all of these goals unless we are paying attention to how they connect to each other. And so paying attention to goal 5, gender equality, will help to bring around the achievement of goal 8 of decent work and economic growth. And, the same goes the other way, that achieving goal 8 of decent work and economic growth requires the achievement of goal 5 for gender equality. Next slide, please. So, as we think about women and work, again, more than half the world's population are women, and yet they're only 40% of the global workforce. And so women are not at equity, as several of the commenters today have discussed. Around the world, not just in the Latin American and African contexts, but everywhere around the world, we see persistent gender disparities and discrimination in career opportunities, career pathways, earning wages, and so on. A large component of these persistent disparities are the lack of societal supports for working mothers. We do not see protection floors that extend to childcare, to postpartum health care, to family planning, to maternity leave. And if we're going to achieve the kind of gender equity in the workplace that we so desire, we need to see particular supports and interventions given to women and to working mothers. Next slide, please. So why do we want women at work? Why is this important? It's important for economic security and mobility for women and their families. It's important for women to work because it provides them with opportunities for self-determination. When we think about the reasons that women are able to leave situations of domestic violence or insecurity, it has to do with their ability to work and to earn income and to provide for themselves and their children. And so it's important that women have access to working, to having that economic security for themselves, and not to be dependent on, a man or an abusive family system or something like that. And there are positive ripple impacts for women who work. They bring that money home to their family. They bring that money home to spend in their communities. And so as we support women in working, as we support women in earning their wages, that brings only good things to their families and to their communities. And when we think about these wonderful words, inclusion, resilience, job-rich, sustainable sort of community development, that is going to require women's full participation in the workforce. So What does inclusive economic opportunity for women require? It requires that employers understand the specific needs that women are bringing into the workplace. This might require sensitivity training for them and flexibility. Again, if you have a young mother who is working for you, are you creating time for her to feed her baby or to drop her children off at school and then come to work? So how are employers thinking about supporting women and mothers in the workplace? It requires supportive services and policies at all levels. Very few employers are going to provide the flexibility needed for women and working mothers. And so we need government policies that require these types of supports for women and working mothers. It also requires access to education and training for women, education and career training that are aligned with what kinds of jobs are out there in the marketplace. And again, it requires our continued advocacy. Again, I think events like this help to highlight the ongoing needs and the need for us to continue to advocate for the full inclusion and support of women in the workplace. This is hard work. We all know that. We have not yet, in the year of our Lord, 2023, achieved gender equity. We have known for a while these challenges that we face as women and as allies. And why do we continue this work? I've put 3 of my favorite quotes up on the screen that are touchstones for me in this work. Audre Lorde said, "I am not free, while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." Similarly, Maya Angelou said, "The truth is, no one of us can be free until everyone is free." And Brene Brown said, "There's no such thing as one-way liberation." And so we continue this work towards equity and towards women's full inclusion in the workplace because we all benefit when women and their families are included in inclusive, sustainable, resilient policies. We all raise each other up. So just a few short reflections and comments, and thank you again for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you, Lydia, for your remarks, and thank you for noting that the struggle is indeed global, and even here in the United States, there's still a lot of discrimination against women in the workplace. While you were speaking, I just had a quick look on to see countries that give paid leave mandated by the government, that women, after you have a child, you must be given paid leave for parents, both men and women in some cases. Estonia is at the top of the list with 86 weeks. You can have up to 86 weeks of paid leave if you are a new parent. It goes down the scale. Let me see. Sweden is how many? About 20 weeks. And we keep going. Denmark is around the 15 week, and then we scale all the way down to the United States, 0. So this is still, so it's still a struggle even here. And if you go down to the issue of pay, New York at least has now mandated what they call pay transparency, so that it is clearer if you're discriminating against women doing the same job as men. And so such local action can sometimes become contagious in other places. So thank you for your presentation. Right, so 2 things I want to note. Number 1, we were scheduled to finish at 11, which is in 5 minutes time. Number 2, we haven't had any discussions yet, or questions or comments. So I'm going to just ask Diana, is there some time, a few more minutes that we can, to see if some people have questions or comments of our panelists?
Yes, we can take a few minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I could not hear you, but I saw you nodded. So
yes.
I take that to mean, yes, we have some time.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so participants, colleagues, friends, we have heard some really rich presentations, rich examples, and if you have something you'd like to address to any of the panelists, please show your hand and I shall give you the floor. Okay, so I see Edmundo. Edmundo, please take the.
Yes, thank you for the presentation.
We
So,
cannot hear you, Edmundo, or at least I can't.
can you hear me now? Yes. So, thank you for the presentations. Very inspiring, and I think they show very important ways to combat poverty. And what I would suggest is that it is necessary to continue in this way and with as much collective action as possible. I worked for 16 years at the International Labour Office as an urbanist, and I'm sorry to say it, I think that the way the world of labor is in the economy is structured is still very much based on a Fordist multinational corporations way. You see Davos, the World Economic Forum. So everything that has been presented here today is still in the margins of the economy. And I think that there is a need to change this. And there are ways that are, or let's say, there are processes that are happening more and more, like the social economy, the solidarity economy, social enterprises. I think we need to think with more care, with more attention about these alternatives and join hands together. Housing is, or land is important, as said, for the economic freedom of women, either if they work in agriculture or if they work in home-based enterprises, or of course, even if they work outside, they need a comfortable, decent house to be able to work properly. The connection between employment and the housing movement has already been mentioned. All these are important. What I think is that we need to explore more these, let's say, alternative possibilities, which should not be alternative. They should be really in the center. And let's continue to challenge the model, which is still the main model of the World Economic Forum and related related organizations, the International Federation of Real Estate Developers, which will have a forum in Cannes. I know that HIC is already working to, let's say, to oppose to this. And so my suggestion is to continue on this path. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edmundo, and thank you for also mentioning the social enterprises. And in that regard, I want to note that the governments of Spain and Senegal are co-sponsoring a resolution at the United Nations this year on promoting the social and solidarity economy. So thank you, Edmundo. The next person is Dr. Ife. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Let me start by thanking all our speakers for the wonderful presentation. In fact, listening to you all, I really feel happy and very justified with some of the interventions that I have made so far during the sessions here at the UN. I've said it oftentimes that the voices of women and girls from Africa and Latin America must be amplified as member states and UN discuss issues of social development. So now the ongoing discussion here is the need for a new social contract, the need for a new World Social Summit in 2025. I call on the UN and member states to ensure that women and girls from Africa, Latin America, Asia, and other regions, that they have the opportunity to be part of the planning, organization, and delivering of this summit. So my question now to both the presenters and for everyone that is on this platform, how can we ensure that the outcome of the new World Social Summit will improve the situation of women regarding their rights and well-being? So this, as far as I'm concerned, this is the key question that we have been asking ourselves, during the Civil Society Forum, and as we meet. How do we ensure that it is not another paper, another paper document, how can we ensure that the outcome of this summit will impact the lives of women and girls? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we shall continue, and then maybe when we come back at the end, we can address Dr. Ife's question. So for now, I'd like to move to the next intervention. And there was a hand by Kelvin, somebody. Kelvin, it seems to have disappeared. He had his hand up. I don't see Kelvin anymore. And okay, so we'll go. Okay, we'll go. I see Grace Xavier is waving. Yes, please, you have the floor.
Yo quiero, en nombre de la red de mujeres.
Well, on behalf of HIC Latin America and the Caribbean, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this HIC event. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Maite Rodriguez and Javier Rodriguez for giving me the opportunity to be here. And I would deeply and profoundly would like to see that we women in Latin America and Africa have more opportunities to exchange ideas to improve our lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, gracias, for that. And it was really also a pleasure having you on this panel. Let's go to Mai Ahmed.
مساء الخير شكرا جزيلا.
Good evening. Thank you very much. And excuse me, I will have to speak in Arabic. If it does not annoy you, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity to be present in this important gathering. I am the director of the Economic and Social Rights for Women in the New Women's Association in Egypt. And the main part of our work is to study the economic situation and social situation of women. I agree with all the interventions that addressed issues having to do, for example, with the issue of education, housing, land tenure, ownership in relation with decent work, because if we look to empowering women economically, it is linked, to be honest, with all these aspects, in addition, of course, to addressing the aspects of economic violence against women, such as the privation of their inheritance in many areas and the provision from accessing basic services or the increase in their cost. And Egypt is one of the countries, the economic situation of which proposes more of a problem, which is the crisis of the external debt that is putting more obstacles on the state, which directly affects the economic services for women, such as reducing services for motherhood and children, as well as reducing support for women facing violence and victims of violence, and the rising cost of strategic litigation in cases having to do with women, as well as reducing women's employment. This raises a major problem about how women or feminist movements overcome this crisis that is expected to go on for years in the future. And I value very much the idea of thinking of a new social summit, because with this international conflict, the international wars, COVID, the crisis, and there is a major challenge in achieving SDGs, on top of which are the problems of feminization of poverty, which is part of the conditions of women. And indeed, we need to look into this issue. In particular, I'm very interested in the issue of vocational education for girls, because it may improve women's opportunities in the work market. It is very important on the government's agenda. It may open opportunities for self-employment for women. If attention is given to this issue, it may provide work opportunities, and also the digital economy opportunities. How can this be protected with decent work criteria without posing or imposing more violence against women? I thank you again, and I hope to be always present in such meetings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike Ahmed, for your intervention. I see we still have two people waiting to speak, and may I ask that these be the last two speakers, as we have slightly run over. So with that, I'll ask Sebaka Derek to make a brief intervention. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you for the good information that talking about the gender equality and the issue of the economic of the women. As we are the Darfur Network, we are still, thinking for how to solve, the problem or the economic crisis, that, face, the women, especially, in Africa and Sudan. Sudan, it suffered a lot after, the coup of 25 October. The economic situation is became very complicated, and the women and girls, they are became, the victim of the economic crisis. And especially, the women that, they coming, from the different region, the region of Sudan, they suffer a lot from the war, especially, the Darfur region. There is, many women and girls, they are suffer a lot. And even, their economic situation, it has been, destroyed, totally, when the war it has been, started from 2003. And until now, no economic improve or change, especially, in the region. And also, Sudan, it suffer a lot, like the Blue Nile states, and even, South Kordofan and so on. From here, I'm calling, for the international community, to concentrate, for the issue of the women and the girl, especially, for the economic part, to support them and create for them, like the scheme, generate the scheme, program, to fight, the poverty, and also, to look for them, the good education and healthy, and even, the cost of the living, nowadays, it's became very high, in Sudan. And as we see, the African continent, they are suffer a lot, from the instability, especially, in Libya and Mali, and even, Chad and Sudan and Central Africa. All of these things, the African Union, must put a plan for the 2023 for how to think and concentrate, for this issue. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Derek, for highlighting the issues of conflict and its impacts. Okay, the final speaker is going to be Husna Shechonge. Husna.
Hi, everybody. Someone will help me with that.
Maybe she mute.
Hatuwezi kusikia.
Maybe speak closer to the phone, who's now, or to the computer. Get closer to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now yes.
Maana yangu ni kwamba kidunia wanawake wamekuwa na harakati nyingi sana za kujikomboa kiuchumi, kijamii na kuhakikisha kwamba familia zinaishi vizuri na zinafanya yale ambayo yanastahili. Lakini changamoto inayokabili wanawake ni kwamba sauti yetu haisikiki. Hakuna kitu kinatuunganisha kwenye dunia, ni kama tumeachwa. Kila mtu anafanya la kwake katika eneo lake. Mimi niombe kwamba kwa hii forum ambayo imefanyika, ni nafasi sasa ya dunia kutambua sauti za wanawake na kuunganisha watu pamoja, ili wanawake waweze kushirikiana, waweze kujengeana uwezo, waweze kupeana ushauri, lakini sauti yao iweze kupatwa kwa pamoja. Huo ndio unaweza ukawa ukombozi kwa mwanamke.
So it's trying to say that globally they have a lot of movements that are being related on how they appreciate these women, but there is no reason to say that the country from maybe also Tanzania to Brazil, but this movement has not been used for helping these women to work economically. So what we emphasize that there should be a global movement of appreciating these women so that we can grow and increase their economic globally.
Thank you so much, Husna. I think from what I could hear was a call for a global alliance of women for global empowerment of women. And thank you for that. So I'm going to go back to the panelists now for brief final remarks, a couple of minutes each. We have heard issues of conflict. We have heard about decent work, the digital economy, how we can create more employment for women and ensure that it's decent work and it's protected. Like a term called Uberization of work. That's not what we're looking for. And we also have about how can we ensure that the new outcome of the World Social Summit does not just become a paper document that is shelved away and the usual same old continues. So we'll go back to the panelists for your final word. Can we start by Priscilla, please?
Thank you very much. I wanted to thank again for this conversation, and I think what I wanted to call attention to is how we were able in this platform to have from a UN representative, Andrew, to our esteemed HIC, and to Graça and Olga, and who are head of the União por Moradia in Brazil, and who's not from the Federation, and to emphasize what both of them are talking about, this global alliance of women working for shelter, not for roof, but for habitat that's decent, for gender equality. And then to say that in addition to the treaties, they're really important and necessary to continue to doing groundwork, and because that's where we get all of our hope and excitement. And I share my happiness with Olga and Graça for being able to overcome, at least temporarily, a very dreadful situation in Brazil, and being full of hope like you too. That's it.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. And
thank you,
now,
Rosna. Thank you very much. Asante sana.
Okay, so Olga, please. Olga Luisa León de Quiroga.
Sí, quiero agradecer, pero mucho, mucho.
I would like to thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity, because it's really important to learn more about the work done by the African peoples. I admire them very much, because they suffer a lot, and we need to continue working towards eliminating social inequality. Once we are all brothers and sisters and we get to say we're all equal, we will be happy. Thank you. Thank you very much, each and every one of you, for having me and for listening to what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Diana, please.
Thank you. I think much has already been said, but to just mention that, I mean, the participants as well as the panelists we have been exchanging quite a rich and vast knowledge sharing, experience sharing. There's really a lot that we could learn from each other, and there's really a lot that we need to do towards progressive, action-oriented movements that will be constituted of this cross-regional representation, but also that will try to address real-life experiences and realities. So I am in agreement with the thoughts of thinking about education issues, or thinking about, strategic advocacy processes nationally, where we are, regionally, and of course globally. And HIC is quite has a lot of experience, particularly with that respect, and also thinking about how we can continuously target key political spaces to influence our agenda into those spaces. So thank you to everyone, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Diana. And finally, Lydia, please.
I think Lydia had to leave.
Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have Lydia anymore. Okay, so this brings us almost to the end of this rich discussion and a very wonderful morning or wonderful day. I thank you all for inviting me to moderate what was a very rich and informative discussion. And I think what we are doing here is also the I'm going back to the MDGs now 17, when we talk about partnerships for the goals. This has been a global partnership which is working, doing a lot of groundwork, doing a lot of the organizing and a lot of the actions, real actions on the ground. That's going to lead to societal change, that's going to lead to social transformation, and that's going to push us much closer to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, I thank you all very much. And it was a pleasure moderating. It was a pleasure meeting you all. And I hand over back to Dr. Ife. Thank you for organizing this.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I think we'll hand over to the Secretary General of Habitat International Coalition, who would say the closing remarks. So I yield to Yolande. Yolande, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ife, and thank you all for a very engaging discussion. I've thought about, we have a little time, and I would like to also respond perhaps to the question that you posed, Dr. Ife, on how can we ensure that the outcome of the World Social Summit impacts particularly the lives of women? Because I think your question actually captures the contributions of each of the speakers and the contributions of the participants in this in this meeting that we've had. So firstly, how can we influence or contribute to this? By focusing on social policies and also supporting the motion that was mentioned by Andrew, or the submission that will be made by the governments of Spain and Senegal on submitting a motion on the solidarity economy. Second, how can we ensure that the outcomes prioritize women? By highlighting the connection between employment, work, and land. It's critical. And the contributions made by Diana and, of course, Olga showed this, that land and housing and work are really linked, and that the grassroots work that is being done is very important evidence to use as we make various arguments at global forums. And then lastly, there's a comment that was made in the chat by one of our participants that hasn't been picked up on, but I think is very important to contribute to the conversation. And she was calling for a global binding treaty on violence against women and very stringent mechanisms to implement that. And so what I take away from this conversation is if we follow those three avenues and we keep on pursuing them, it requires a lot of grounded work. It will require focused work. We need to choose which battles we will fight. And let's continue the conversation, I think, along those three avenues. Thank you so much to each and every speaker for your contributions, for the time you took to prepare and to share your valuable experience with us. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your fantastic moderation. And then, of course, a huge thank you to Dr. Iffy and to Diana, who have put a lot of work and thought and preparation into pulling this side event together. And very much, I would like to also thank the Women in Habitat Africa Working Group, who's a very animating and driving force between various participants coming together. So with that, I'm looking forward, and we are looking forward to continuing the conversation and to seeing one another soon in various forums. So many thanks.
Yolande, before we leave,
yes,
could we please take a group photo? I'd like for us to remember this moment. So if you can, please put on your camera and let's take a nice photo to remember for years to come. And thank you again for attending. My colleague Marie will help me with this. So just one extra second for anyone else who has not yet put their camera on. Let's have those big smiles. Let's have those big smiles. Okay. Yes, I think we can take the photo now. Just a minute. Okay. Marie, you're good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and see you soon in our next engagements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Ciao.
Diana, can you?
Gracias.
Okay. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Gracias. Bye bye. Bye, Olga. Bye, Gracia. Thank you so much.
Over, Yolande. Bye bye, Diana.
Bye bye.
Diana.
Bye, Musa.
Musaka.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you,
And Marina.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Asante.
Bye-bye.
Asanteni pia. Bye.
Bye.
Muchas gracias, Olga. Has she signed off already? She has.
Zaida.
Bye, Frank. Nice to see you.
Say hi to Sami, Davida, and Andre.
I will. I will.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Isam,
Dr. Ifai, Mama Africa.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Dr. Ifai. Desmond.
Yeah.